Hello, BookTube. Well, as you can see, I have a guest. This is Janet Wertman, who is the author of these books, Jane the Queen, The Path to Somerset, and The Boy King. This is a Tudor fiction trilogy that starts off with, it's about the Seymour family in the Tudor era. It starts off with the Seymour Queen. It moves on to the tempestuous Seymour brothers, and it ends with the person we don't remember to call the Seymour King. The Seymour family actually did get a king on the throne. Uh, welcome. Welcome to the channel. We haven't talked in years.
It has been a while, and I need to update the copy of Board King I sent you.
Why?
That is,
Why? Does he live
that's
to a
like
ripe old age? In the new version, does he live to a ripe old age? Well, that would be
no, because
nice.
it's still like the pre-order period. There was
Oh, that's
an
right.
early
Yes, it's
copy.
not just Banner that so many books
I,
have. Just it's a
it's not a
finished
choice.
copy.
I have since learned that there is such a thing as a finished copy. It's like, oh, okay.
A finished copy would be wonderful. But as you can tell, those of you who are watching, you can tell from this trilogy that Janet shares with me a fascination for the Tudors. And I'm wondering, now that I've got you on camera to finally talk about the subject, we were actually hilariously, we were wondering, well, will we be able to have a 40-minute conversation about writing and the Tudors? I think we could have a 500-minute conversation. But I want to ask you, since you're here, the first question: why the Tudors? Why is it that they have such perennial fascination, not just for you and me?
Thing. It's we're talking stakes. They're always telling authors, raise the stakes, raise the stakes. And there really are no higher stakes than that. Then you also have the Wheel of Fortune. People go up, people come down, people go back up, they go back down, and you just watch that over and over. This is good stuff. This is central.
Is that Edward framed behind you?
Yes, it is. Oh no, that's Boy King. There's a ribbon. There was a ribbon in that writing contest.
That's
Yes.
would you say also uh that that the Tudor period, the Tudor people, and even the Tudor monarchs seem very immediately human? I mean, there are other royal periods that do not attract this kind of, the Hanoverians don't attract this kind of attention at all.
They are unbelievably human, and tragically human, comically human. I mean, you just kind of name them. You do have to feel bad for Henry. Most people don't feel bad for Henry. I can summon pity for everyone but Richard Rich, I should say. uh, I gave Stephen Gardner a point of view in Path to Somerset, although I couldn't make him likable. I still didn't like him, but
The only one I can't summon pity for is Mary. I mean, I should be able to. A miserable childhood. God knows what's going on with her health, but I just can't do it. I don't see
she
anything human in her. She seems as reptilian as her mother. I,
she didn't kill Elizabeth. She had the chance.
it's true. She didn't kill Elizabeth.
She had the chance, and she didn't do it.
The idea must have crossed her mind. Um,
Really, really close. Don't get me wrong.
I'm curious to know also, since you've written Tudor fiction, what your relationship is with other people's written Tudor fiction. I'm assuming you've read it all. I mean, did you spend lots of time, lots of rereads with the other Boleyn girl or Wolf Hall?
So on the one hand, I've read a bunch of the stuff from for a long time. I did do the reread of Wolf Hall. I loved that. Hilary Mantel's Jane, not my Jane, very, very different. Although
Very, very.
totally. Um, although that last reread of book three, that death scene for Cromwell, that was oh, oh, incredible. Other Tudor fiction I really can't talk about. I would prefer to I would prefer to think that um, let's just say I haven't, I've read a bunch of Philippa Gregory. That's my guilty pleasure. I don't like her Elizabeth. She hates Elizabeth. You
Yes.
can't read anything. She does not like Elizabeth. So
Yeah.
anytime,
I reread The Other Boleyn Girl. I actually want to find a hardcover copy of The Other Boleyn Girl. I don't have a copy of it now, except as an ebook. But I reread it a couple of years ago, and I was struck by how much she hates everybody. Even Mary Boleyn is it's the authorial presence in that book is so jagged. It's just, and you mentioned Hilary Mantel's portrayal of your very own Jane Seymour. She hates Jane Seymour. Doesn't even think of her as human. She reads over and over again every time we see her like she's some sort of mutated mushroom, something like that. Not human at all.
but I grew up on Jean Plady, all of those.
I was going to ask. I was going to ask about Jean Grey. Uh, have you had any occasion to revisit her Tudor novels anytime recently?
Uh,
For instance, since you wrote your own?
I have not, and I'm a little bit nervous about that because I did have occasion just like a couple of weeks ago to reread The Serpent Queen, which was supposedly Catherine de Medici, but Catherine de Medici didn't show up until halfway through the book. You know what?
I think you'll
That
be
one.
surprised at how well Jean Plady holds up. I'm making my way steadily through a lot of her stuff, not the Tudor stuff, but it's she was very conscientious, far more conscientious than she needed to be to write Tudor era bodice rippers of the time. Uh, but getting back to the Tudors, the fascination of this. Do you remember when your fascination started?
Oh, absolutely. I was 8 years old, and well, I really shouldn't talk about dates, being only 28 myself. I was 8 years old, and the BBC put on The Six Wives of Henry VIII, and I was allowed to stay up late to watch it. And the second episode, Anne Boleyn dies, and I was, this can happen? I was amazed, and from then on, then they did Elizabeth, and then I found Jean Plady, and that was kind of it. It's been an obsession ever since.
That BBC Henry VIII thing is quite something to watch. I was remembering, I forget the name of the character actor that played Cromwell in that series. In that series, he is accurately portrayed as a sniveling climber and a backstabber and whatnot. But there's a little detail from the Tudor records. We don't know how reliable it is, but at least it's there. At least you don't have to infer it. There is a Tudor era record of Henry laying hands on Cromwell, shaking him like a rat.
Yep.
And that scene, of course, is in that miniseries where I also forget the name of the great actor who plays Henry. He's enormous. He grabs him and
Keith
shakes him.
Mitchell.
And then when it's done, that Cromwell has to nervously gulp wine to calm his nerves. And I could only think about that scene when I was reading in the second half of Bring Up the Bodies and in The Mirror and the Light by Hilary Mantel, because the Cromwell that she has invented certainly would not, that would never happen. And of course, it doesn't happen. I mean, that is something that someone, at least at the period, attested to. They might not have been right about it, but at least it's there in the record, and she just ignores it. In fact, the closest she comes is to have her Cromwell say, "Well, if Henry ever did lay hands on me, I'd just walk. I'd be out the door." But that's it. It's just a hypothetical. It doesn't happen. But all the rest of that, oh my, the rest of that series, just incredible, just incredible.
Perfect.
So
That's still my Henry. In my mind, that's my Henry.
yes, yes, I was making all the worse that I can't remember the name of the actor. Uh,
Keith
but
Mitchell.
yes, there's a scene. There's so many great scenes in that miniseries, but the scene where he goes in disguise to Anne of Cleves, when he's a foot taller than anyone else, he's absolutely enormous. There's no chance she's going to mistake him for anybody else. Uh, that scene is wonderfully done in The Mirror and the Light because for a split second she doesn't know who he is, just knows that she finds him repulsive. It would be different if she did, but she doesn't. Uh, but okay, so you encountered this miniseries, and then Jean Plady and so on when you were little, 20 years ago. So, at what point, though, did you know? I have known other people who were enraptured by the Tudors, and I've known scholars and also two writers who were enraptured by this period and these people, and they always describe, well, here's when I became aware of it, but they always describe a second moment where they go off a cliff, where they know, all right, this is going to be a big part of my life. Was there a separate part like that for you? There must have been, because writing three novels is not easy to do.
And more and more. It's ah, um so I always wanted to write about them, and just people. I was going to do a children's book, and then Ali Sheedy, of all people, wrote She Was Nice to Mice about Elizabeth the First, a kid's book about the Tudors. And Ali Sheedy's only 28 years old as well. We're somewhat contemporary.
All the best people
but,
are.
but that kind of ruined it for me, because how many, young adult or whatever novels by a 16-year-old can the market hold? So that got pushed aside. And then what I did write. I was 150 pages. Oh, sorry. I keep
Why are
getting
you doing this?
distracted.
She hears another voice. That's what's going on here. It's just making her curious.
I was 150 pages into a brilliant novel, a dual timeline novel called The Secret Diary of Anne Boleyn. And it was going to be Anne Boleyn and then Elizabeth reading it, and it was perfect. I had the cover and everything. And 150 pages in, I was finally doing it. And I look up this little bit and I read about this novel that was just published the week before called The Secret Diary of Anne Boleyn, dual timeline. And I was just like, oh no. And it took me a while to get over that. But that's when I turned to Jane and I got in earnest. Fun part, fun part of this is I was in a writer's group and Robin Maxwell showed up, and I got to tell that story to her. And she just laughed and said, "Oh my God, you're the second person who's told me that."
Well, it's such a natural thing. It's such a natural story. She just beat you all to the punch. That's all. I
That's
knew an author once that happened to for a long work of scholarly biography, and he actually never recovered. He didn't want to bring the book to market and have it ignored. He didn't want to be called, you know, a, a trend follower when he'd been working on his book for 30 years. The other person had not, and so he didn't do it. He didn't do anything with it. As far as I know, it's never been published. It destroyed him. So I'm glad you bounced back.
Well, that's exactly what I did. I dickered around for like 15 years, and my own fault. So
But so you mentioned one of the things that attracts you to the Tudors is the Wheel of Fortune concept, that someone will be at the top of the world, dispensing manors, huge incomes and whatnot, and then they'll be completely destroyed. And the detail that becomes obvious when you look at the Tudor period most prominently is that the thing that will abruptly destroy you will be the monarch. It will be whoever's on the throne. And when you were researching these three books about the Seymour family, I mean, they're a perfect example. There are other perfect, the Boleyns are a perfect example as well. They're a perfect example of a family that isn't all that close to the sun and decides to try it because there's this gamble. If we make it, well, then the whole world is ours. Then we no longer need to worry about anything. And you as a writer, as a researcher, did you ever reach a point where you're saying to them, "No, stop now. Cut your losses now." I feel like saying that about the Duke of Norfolk, even. He's not all that sympathetic. I always feel like telling him, cut your losses. Don't put forward another niece.
you wouldn't think he would you? I
Well,
mean,
and the same thing came out in the Cromwell books by Hilary Mantel. It's not stressed. We see Cromwell's largesse. We see that he can dispense whole estates, whole manors, and strings of manors and whatnot easily just by signing a paper. Lifelong wealth to someone he barely knows. But we also see that he's in extreme danger every minute of every day. Any of it could come crashing down in no time. You're reading the book and he's not wondering, but you're wondering, why are you doing this? Why not cut your losses?
It didn't happen as much with Elizabeth. She
No.
did not kill anywhere near as many people, and when she did, she had a hard time.
Yeah,
She'd sign it, take it back, sign it, take it
yeah,
back.
very interesting to look at. The thing you run the risk of with her is her displeasure, not the acts. You,
Right.
it's her banishing you from court and not wanting to see you anymore, which
Which
is
has happened.
it's in order of magnitude less. Oh, but speaking of banishing people from court and not wanting to see them again, shall we make a world's first announcement to my viewers? For the very first time in my life, and in yours too, I would imagine, I'm going to do something of a collaborative NanoRimo in November. We're going to do NanoRimo together, not just as writing buddies, but with pendant projects. What an idea is that? Care to introduce my listeners to Lettice Knowles?
I definitely got the better end of this bargain. Lettice Knowles was either Elizabeth's cousin or Elizabeth's niece, depending on, there's a question of, did Henry VIII father Lettice's mother? You can follow that. Sorry. And she came to court, and she was a beautiful young woman who looked, everybody said, oh, she looks exactly like you, 15 years younger, which really kind of pissed Elizabeth off from the very beginning. Lettice ended up marrying Robert Dudley, the great love of Elizabeth's life, getting completely banished from court, although she was allowed back one single time. And then her son, Essex, rebelled against Elizabeth. And to me, I'm getting ahead of myself, but to me, that is the piece that makes me think that Lettice was Elizabeth's niece, because Essex's whole idea of rebelling is only because he thinks that he can take over the throne. So that, to me, it's a great story.
Yes,
It is.
and it's preceded by a less great story, which is the short straw that I drew in this little project. Because before Lettice Knowles was married to Robert Dudley, she was married to someone named Walter Devereux. And I'm going to be telling his story for my NaNoWriMo for my NaNoWriMo project. 50,000 words of Walter Devereux, her first husband, uh, who is not known at all to non-Tudor buffs, except in Northern Ireland, where his name is a black figure in the most evil depths of the country's history. So, yay. Yay. And I think you mentioned that there is one little question mark around Walter Devereux, which is how and why he died. Uh, he was in Ireland. He was at a banquet, and he took sick and died a little while later. And the bland verdict of history is he died of dysentery. But there was a persistent story that has existed from that moment to now, that a judge's daughter drank from the same cup that he did at the same time and also died, which is not how dysentery works. So, and you can't give somebody dysentery, you know. There's always been a question whether or not he was poisoned, and if he was poisoned, who poisoned him. Uh, right? The romantic version is that Dudley had him poisoned to clear the path for marrying his wife, but he had no shortage of enemies in Ireland. And I don't know of a poison that brings on dysentery. So, and I don't know that the story about the judge's daughter is true.
It could have been Lettice too. She really didn't like him.
It's true. She didn't like him. Although maybe she did.
Who
Maybe she
knows?
did like him. A lot of
We
children.
don't know.
A doting, apparently doting married life. That's, be hard to hide your if she did have, Tudor blood in her veins, it'd be hard for her to hide her dislike under such circumstances for so long. Uh, but there's a little cloud hanging over Walter Devereux's death. Was he poisoned? And that parallels something you're going to have to deal with, which is a cloud hanging over someone else's death, also an impediment to love. And that is Amy Robsart, Robert Dudley's wife. You've got Robert Dudley as the Queen's favorite. Every day, new honor showered on him. Him, if he's human, thinking, well, there aren't many precedents, but who's to say she wouldn't marry me and make me king consort? But I'm already married. So there's Amy and her mysterious death, which was ruled what? It was ruled no foul play, right? The coroner said there was no foul play.
Yeah. No, he was acquitted.
Died of an accident, falling down a flight of stairs.
That was one thing that Elizabeth did. She was taking no chances. Well, Robert Dudley, right away called in Amy's brother and Amy's relatives and said, you guys go ahead, make the fullest investigation you need to. Because he knew right away, as soon as she had died, he's like, oh, I'm dead. I can't. She'll never marry me now. Now, he did continue to think she might marry him, but no, she was never marrying him after that. So.
And it wasn't until centuries later that her actual autopsy report was discovered, right? Which showed, let's just say, injuries inconsistent with falling down the flight of stairs. A couple of blows to the back of the head is what it looks like to me as an amateur. It looks like she was struck and fell down the stairs, but not fell down the stairs and struck her head on the way.
3 steps.
I know that's another thing. People when they think about it, come to place, they think, oh well, it's this tall, steep Tudor staircase. But no, it's a tiny little thing. You'd be lucky if you bruised an elbow if you fell down it, much less crack your head open like an egg. So I gather, since you blurt out that it's just a few steps, that you don't think that it was natural.
So I don't need to. So I'm busy writing my current trilogy is about Elizabeth. And so Elizabeth, I don't need to decide which it was because Elizabeth doesn't need to decide which it was. Elizabeth knows it wasn't her. She doesn't think it was Robert Dudley. Cecil is looking a little bit guilty when she gives him a little bit of the side eye. He had the motive and all of that, but she never has to decide what really did it. She just has to decide how to deal with Robert Dudley afterwards. So I go back and forth. It's a good story no matter how you spin it. It's a better story if it's murder, but even then,
Boy, though, writing a work on Elizabeth, you on the surface, I might think, just as someone who's never done it, I might think that the real tangle, the person that's going to be the hardest to pin down into a convincing fictional portrait will be Walsingham, but actually it's Cecil. To me, he seems like it's just a black box. I mean, what do you do with a figure like that?
Oh, he's wonderful.
You did just finger him for murder, did you not? Just about a second ago.
I don't think he really did it. I don't think he would really do that. So, which is why I can very freely toss around the accusations. He's there with his little lists of all the pros and cons. He's like, just picture him. I've written down, here's all the reasons you should, all the reasons you shouldn't, and he's always thinking about how to weigh things. So yeah, I know.
You cast your characters in your head? Do you put actors to them?
No. People always ask me if I do. Other than Keith Mitchell is always Henry.
Oh, Keith Mitchell, that's right. That's his name. That's the Henry from the BBC production. It's hard to think of another Henry. Once you've seen that show a few times, it's hard to think. Although I don't understand. Maybe you could tell me, solve a long-standing mystery for me, where the writer of that final episode came up with Henry's final words. In the miniseries, he bolts up in his sickbed and says, "Monks,
That,
monks."
oh, that was one of the stories.
That was one of the stories.
It was absolutely one of the stories that he saw monks at the very end, and like, yes, guilt.
It's totally fictitious, but I much prefer Henry's final line in the great old black and white Errol Flynn version of The Prince and the Pauper, where Henry's on his deathbed and he leans forward to say his final words, but his final words are, "Now to face them all," meaning all the fellow kings that have gone before. That just, I love that. That's just awesome. It has a little bit more of a ring to it than monks. But aside from Keith Mitchell, you don't cast anybody else.
Glenda Jackson as Elizabeth. So yes, she's right there.
But what about not in terms of we're running out of time here. We haven't even started to talk about the process of writing. But apart from casting, do you make a call ahead of time when you're sculpting the outline of a book as to the tone of a character? I mean, do you ever start off a novel thinking, okay, I'm largely going to like this character, and then it turns out you don't? Or do you set ahead of time? No, this character is going to be likable. Maybe not a hero, but certainly likable.
I did write Amy Robsart a love story for NanoRimo. And basically because I know we just talked about how her husband might have pushed her down the stairs to kill her, but if you stop her story at the right time, she had a happily ever after. Halfway through the book, the two of them hated each other. That was not going to be a romance. I thought I was going to like her at the beginning of the book, and I didn't like her midway through the book either. I didn't like either of them, but I kept going.
And you kept going. There's a point at which you outrun even the limit of what we know, right? Documentary speaking, there comes a point where you're just you're flying on your own. You're saying,
Yes.
I mean, we don't know where you were this whole year. For instance, any character, you pick any character that's in your book and you figure, okay, all of 1531, I don't have any idea where you were. Nobody knows. Nobody has any idea. There's no record of you ever even being alive during that year. So who knows what it was? Do you have methods in place in books like these? Do you have methods in place to make sure you don't go too far in blank periods like that? Do you like, for instance, are you the type of historical writer that keeps timelines printed up so that, yes?
I've got everything except here's my problem is that I started making these timelines like 20 years ago and I didn't footnote them. I just wrote down where the timelines were and where things happened, and I didn't write down where I got it from. And so I don't know which one is really reliable. And so there are a couple of like, anything from the Spanish Chronicle, just throw that over the shoulder, but it's still fun. So yes, I have a timeline, but timeline might be, I try to be as accurate as possible.
And does the timeline highlight things like, okay, I'm bringing two people into a room, they were both real people, but how old were they each? Are we talking about
No,
a young
that I
man?
have
Yes.
that I have to do separately. This is just, the timeline shows where they were at a particular time, and I have to then situate them in the actual, it goes timeline, outline, draft, and then
Oh,
on.
okay. Okay. And where do the liberties come in at all, or if they do? I've
So
known historical novelists who would say, I've got a timeline, I've got a chronology here, I've got a setup of where everybody was, but this doesn't work for me. Are we done with that kind of history, with that kind of historical fiction, or
So the way I structure my books, because this just works for me, I do a date stamp on every new scene, which actually allows me to kind of skip a year where nothing happened. I just all of a sudden, oh, there we are, but I've told the reader, so I'm okay. So the made up stuff happens kind of in between,
Mm.
or I will like give myself, I'll do a scene that has to happen, and I'll just put the date in brackets as a signal to myself that, okay, you've got some liberties here.
I see.
This is something that you made up. So like one of the things that I just switched in the latest, the writing collective, I did an edit as opposed to new things. I had, when Elizabeth hired Cecil to be her surveyor, I had the date in brackets because we only know when Cecil ended up being her surveyor. And then I realized that I was a month away from the wedding between Somerset's daughter and Northumberland's heir. It all happened there. And I just switched that all into a wedding scene, and I shoved everybody in the scene. That is like, I got him out of the house. And that was so the brackets came off because I know exactly when the wedding was. So
And that's the sort of thing where what your researching instincts might lead you to think, okay, it probably didn't happen, but you can't say for sure that it didn't. I get to dramatize it.
I certain things I get to dramatize. We know he became her surveyor. We know that they were both at this wedding, so I'm taking that. I'm allowed. They talked about it there.
And you're looking forward to your Latisse project for NanoRimo.
I am. And now you've announced it, so it's going to be harder for you to back out.
I'm not going to back out. No, I'm going to do Walter Devereux. I'm going to do Walter Devereux. I have a few months to figure out how on earth I'm going to do that. But Latisse's story goes on, right? You've mentioned she pushes her son into a place of prominence at Elizabeth's court that she can't
Yes.
have. She can't have it anymore. She can't be there
She can't
herself.
see it. She can't see it. She can't witness it. None of that. I have fun with that.
So will your story, your exciting, interesting story for NaNoWriMo, will it involve the Essex Rebellion?
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
Fascinating
Well,
story.
it will be part of it. That will be at the end. I mean, the Walter thing will absolutely be there, but it has to go on. That's
Those of you who have not read up in Tudor history, the Essex Rebellion is fascinating. It's a fascinating little thing because Essex was and his compatriots were expecting the people to rise and they did not. And that's what is that a testament to? Is it a testament to how pathetic they were in their Popinjay clothing with their silly toy rapiers, or is it a testament to how popular Elizabeth was?
I like to think of it as a testament to how popular Elizabeth was, but you can't erase the fact of Essex going to try to raise the country, realizing that, oh, I missed the mass, or not mass, but the service at St. Paul's. So there's nobody here. I'm going to go have lunch. And then sitting there with somebody and just eating his meal for 3 hours while his people are around. No, that's just.
So Elizabeth might have been popular, but he was inept.
Yes, exactly.
Well, we're gonna run out of time, and I don't want to run out of time in mid sentence. I want to hold up your books again because they are lovely. Uh, feel free to find them on your favorite internet bookseller of choice. But we will perhaps do another update the closer we get to NaNoWriMo. Talk a little bit more about writing.
And about the outlines and where we're going. Fun.
All righty. Well, thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
the morning chat. We'll wrap this up, and I will see you soon.